Good morning from Ohio State University's Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy in beautiful Columbus, Ohio. I am Laura Justice, Executive Director of the Crane Center and Professor of Educational Psychology in the College of Education and Human Ecology. Yesterday, I attended a webinar on anti-racism in higher education, and Professor D.L. Stewart of Colorado State University stated the following: "You can't do better if you don't know better." The faculty and staff in the Crane Center want to do our best in promoting anti-bias and anti-racist practices and policies in early childhood education, and to do so, we need to know better. This symposium was designed to help us all know better by convening experts in anti-bias and anti-racist practices and policies and bringing them together with us for a day of learning. I welcome you to the 7th annual Symposium on Children, hosted by the Crane Center. By way of introduction, the Crane Center conducts high-quality research that seeks to improve the lives of young children and those who care for them. We believe in the power of research to transform policies and practices, and are currently partnering with our keynote speaker, Dr. Iruka, who you'll meet shortly, to incorporate concrete anti-bias and anti-racist practices in the early learning programs affiliated with our center. In developing today's program, we consulted with colleagues at Ohio State, including Dean Pope Davis, who you'll hear from shortly, as well as Professor Antoinette Miranda and Distinguished Professor Donna Ford. We are grateful for their insights on today's topic, as well as helping us select invited speakers. In addition, today's event is co-sponsored by the City of Columbus Department of Education, a valued partner in much of the work we do. The importance of achieving anti-bias and anti-racism in early education settings cannot be understated. The first 5 years of life are the most formative across the lifespan, and there is enormous opportunity to positively influence how children view the differences among us. The fact that more than 800 people across the country are registered for today's event shows that we get it. The achievement of a morally and socially just future involves ensuring that our early care and education programs and the larger early care system are free of bias and racist practices. And today is about how we can best achieve this in concrete terms. We do have a very full schedule, and I'd like to share a few housekeeping points. First, unlike in past years, today we are Zooming. And that means you might see cats, dogs, pets, children, who knows what else, and we might experience tech issues we have to grapple with. So we thank you in advance for your patience and your adaptability. Second, please say hi to us in the chat box. Post your name and where you're from, what you do. With so many people joining us, we'd love to know more about you. And also keep an eye on the chat box for housekeeping items and tips for how to engage and get the most out of today. The work we do at the Crane Center would not be possible without the generous support of the Crane family. And we greatly value the ongoing guidance, support, and friendship of Tanny Crane, President and CEO of the Crane Group. We have invited Tanny Crane to open this year's symposium and to welcome you. And to that end, I introduced Tanny Crane, a tireless champion and thought leader in Ohio regarding the importance of early childhood education.
Thank you, Laura. It is great to be together today, despite the challenges we're all facing. I want to thank you, Laura, and your amazing team at the Crane Center for putting today's events on and for having the vision to tackle these pressing issues, like what it means to bring anti-bias and anti-racist practices to early childhood education. Today, you'll have the pleasure to hear from Dr. Iruka, our keynote. She is a scholar who is as engaging as she is brilliant, as she shares how early education can dismantle and eradicate racism, bias, and systemic barriers to opportunities. You'll hear about addressing racial inequities in early education policies, both from a wide-angle lens as well as locally. You'll also hear about cultivating positive racial identity while learning tangible solutions to promote success, particularly for Black children, and hear directly from educators who focus specifically in anti-bias and anti-racist education that will be sure to inspire and challenge all of us to commit more deeply to this critical work. As someone who has been committed to children's issues for a long, long time and engaged with many other partners in this work, I can say that it has never been more urgent to challenge ourselves to do better and to be outwardly anti-racist. Combating racism and bias is a nonpartisan issue. It is essential for the well-being of all of our children. And it is hard work. For as long as I've been an adult, a mom, and deeply embedded in these early education issues, I continue to ask, what will it take so that educational, health, and life outcomes will improve for all children? If we didn't realize this before, 2020 has made it abundantly clear. Food insecurity, homelessness, lack of healthcare, closure and loss of childcare programs has taken a huge toll on babies, toddlers, children, and their families. This pandemic has increased the size of childcare deserts. It has placed huge stress and strain on caregivers, which we know from research can impact children negatively. And for Black and Brown children, they experience the effects of systemic racism as well. For as trying as this year has been for many, it has also forced us to look at the way things are broken, how policies have failed, the inequities that for too long we've looked away from. But it is also a moment where we need leaders more than ever. We need more thoughtful, committed citizens who want to build a better world. And for the purposes of today's gathering, we need more scholars, activists, policymakers, advocates, teachers, principals, community leaders, and parents who are willing to examine what it means to be more actively anti-racist and anti-biased. Thank you so very much for being here today, for your commitment and your willingness to be open-minded. Together, we will make change. And now I'm going to introduce to you Dean Donald Pope Davis from the College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University. He earned his PhD from Stanford University and serves as a member of the steering committee of Deans for Social Justice and Equity in Education. He is also the incoming chair of the American Psychological Association's Committee of Ethnic Minority Affairs. Dean Pope Davis is also passionate about using higher education to address issues of equity. Since arriving at The Ohio State University, Dean Pope Davis has shared his passion around urban education and his particularly passion around early education. He won me over on day one. Please join me in welcoming Dean Pope Davis.
Thank you, Tanny, for that great introduction. I'm glad to be here with you this morning with this esteemed lineup of speakers pressing forward on anti-bias and anti-racist practices in early childhood education. The College of Education and Human Ecology is the training ground for those working on improving the human experience over the lifespan. And we take seriously our charge to prepare and to lead in positive ways to impact generations to come. As Dean of the College, I set our course to do this based upon 5 core values: excellence, justice, diversity, innovation, and internationalization. At the core of each of these values, however, is equity. It is impossible to achieve any of these values without the inclusion of people from all backgrounds and experiences. And we already know that the DAC is stacked amongst many populations. It is not equal. So we must commit to an anti-bias and anti-racist practice in order to change that experience for many. Here at OSU, the College of Education and Human Ecology is committed and is actively involved in this work. To date, we have been involved in a variety of workshops, webinars, research activities, as well as having some difficult dialogues in our college. And so today I am thrilled to be here to support the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy in promoting anti-bias and anti-racist practices in early childhood education. The sooner we can get to our kids and our students, the better it improves our society. Early childhood is a critical window of time where we can set children up for success and broaden their experiences and perspectives. And while this is an exciting opportunity, it also carries for all of us a high level of responsibility. And it is clear that there is much work to be done across the broad areas of our society in early learning environments so that all children experience a sense of equitable engagement and treatment without bias or racism. Our college is committed to excellence for the benefit of all children and families, as well as our communities and future generations. We must train those who will enter the field of education. We must offer ongoing training for those who are already in the field, along with administrators, researchers, advocates, and policymakers, to equip them to embrace and engage the changes that are ahead of them and this opportunity. This is our moment to make a difference in the lives not only of our children, but of our society in early childhood education. By your participation here today, you are joining in this commitment. I am glad you are here with us, and I welcome you to approach this day with openness and engagement, and be open in particular to new ways of thinking about your work and your activity. Identifying your own biases and confronting systemic racism is difficult for all of us. It is difficult for us to be self-reflective so that we can see the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. But it is vital for us to do this in making generational changes. We are all part of this work. This is how we create a more equitable future, and this will be our legacy.
Thank you so much, Dean Pope Davis and Tanny Crane, for welcoming all of us to this event. And I think everyone listening in will agree that your comments were very inspiring and really do a wonderful job in setting the tone today about not only how serious this discussion is, but that we do have challenges we will continue to face as we pursue a legacy of racism in this country, and that we are on a journey. But there's more than 500 people tuning in right now. So power with people. I am very excited to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Iheoma Iruka is, in my opinion, the foremost scholar in this country on anti-bias, anti-racism practices in early education. She is someone that I've come to know personally as well over the last few years, and I just have tremendous respect for her as a scholar and a person. Dr. Iheoma Iruka is research professor in the Department of Public Policy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she's also the director of the Early Child Health and Racial Equity Program at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. And Iheoma, this is a new job for you. She recently left another position, and it's going to be really exciting to see what you do with this important leadership position at UNC. Dr. Iruka's work focuses on addressing opportunity gaps, determining how early experience impact poor and ethnic minority children's learning and development, and the role of the family in education environments and systems. Importantly, Dr. Iruka with several colleagues, including Stephanie Curenton, who will be with us later today, recently published the book, Don't Look Away, Embracing Anti-Bias Classrooms, which we have really used to serve as foundational of today's events, because her book, Don't Look Away, offers concrete, tangible actions we can take in the very near future. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Iruka with us today. If you haven't heard her speak, you will quickly see why we were so eager to have her join us today for this event. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laura Justice. I mean, I feel like you should be my MC every now. I just thank you for the words. I stand in sort of on the shoulders of so many people. So just thank you for those words. I really take it as one of the premier experts in early childhood, Laura. I really appreciate you saying that. And I feel in many ways that Dean Pope Davis and Ms. Tanny Crane really, I think, set sort of the agenda of what we're supposed to be doing today. And so I'm hoping that I am able to meet the call in so many ways. And so I want to first thank OSU and the Buckeye Nation. I should say that I was at OSU last year, and I was telling folks that I'm a Miami Hurricane, so I'll forgive y'all for now, but it's okay. So I want to say thank you, and I also want to thank the whole entire Crane Center team, including, obviously Laura Justice, Tanny Crane, Kathy Kupski, Jamie O'Leary, and of course, so many, many more. And also want to thank Dean Pope Davis for seeking to really, his work speaks to how we can really take all of our different roles and be part of dismantling inequity, systemic injustices, racism writ large as well. So thank you for just having me on, and to be the official Zoom keynote for this really important statewide convening. And Lily and Chrissy, if you don't know, I do speak fast, but I'm going to try to not be as fast, because when I get really excited, I start speaking fast. I want to make sure that you can see my actual second screen, which is my full screen. So let me know if you're seeing my my smaller screen, and I'll make sure it's set up, but I'm hoping you're looking at my actual full screen. So the title is Addressing Anti-Bias and Anti-Racist Practices in Early Childhood. But I really want to say this really is just about addressing anti-bias and anti-racist practices, period, right? Like I feel like whether in early childhood education, in health, in welfare, in every single segment, I'm hoping that what I'm going to share with you is sort of the journey of unlearning and relearning, and that all of us, no matter your race, your nationality, your creed, we are all bathed in issues of bias and racism, and particularly, anti-Black racism. So we are all bathed in that. And so in many ways, we have to sort of be part of the journey. We all have to be on a journey. I tell it to people all the time. I'm not an expert in all this, right? Like I had to go on my own journey, and I'll try to give you some tidbits of it. But, I've told people, look, I'm still on a journey, and I will always be on a journey till the day I die. And so as we go, I kind of give you this image from, a very wonderful artist drew this during one of my talks. And I feel like she captured the idea of this journey that we all just have to get on it somewhere, and it's going to help us become richer. And I'll talk about what does that mean. That to me is the work that we all have to do, whether as educators, as scholars, as leaders, as business owners, whatever it is that we do and who we are. That part of it is that, for our country to be fully enriched by all the diversity and vibrancy which we could be, that we have to sort of operate on this be richer. And I'll explain in a little bit. So put on your seatbelts, Now you may have some emotions, you may have some level of uncomfortability or whatever, but I say just lean into that. Hold on to your pet, hold on to your kids. My kid may come in here anytime. I have 2 of them. So just hold on to whoever, but hopefully you hold on to them so that you can continue to stay in the space with us. Even though we're in Zoom world and you can't see your neighbor, you can't see your friend, you can't see your sister girl, I want you to know that even in a Zoom world, use your chat box, because sometimes just being able to emote and talk is really important, especially during this kind of sort of, I would say, convening. So you're either racist or anti-racist. There literally is no in between. There's no such thing as I'm not racist. Nope, that doesn't exist. It's racist or anti-racist. And to me, silence is complicity in that. So by not being active and being an anti-racist, there's only one other door for you to walk through. And I know that's really hard to hear, but I want you to lean in on that notion of you're either racist or anti-racist. And being silent in any form is really complicit in allowing all the inequities to exist. So first, I want to kind of get some definitions out of the way. So what is implicit bias? Really, implicit bias is literally automatic, it's uncontrolled. These are cognitive processes that we just have. It's innate to who we are, and they're thought to be involuntary, and we can't really control them. And so when people talk about, oh, you have bias, well, I have a bias, and my bias is that I love being Black, and I love Black people and everything Black. So I tell people that's literally my bias, and so that guides a lot of my reactions, my beliefs, even my behaviors. But I'm very much aware of a lot of my biases, and that takes work to sort of actually be aware of it, and to also be cognitively aware as to how it's impacting your decision making, your interactions, and all the things that you do. But it is automatic and it is uncontrolled, but it doesn't mean that we should just let it lead us into just being who we are and being not the best selves that we can be. But more importantly, what is institutional racism? What is racism? So let's make sure, because I think people throw out like, you're racist because you call me the N-word. Like this, let's understand that racism, at least the one I'm talking about and that I hope that we talk about, is a use of institutional power to organize around white supremacy and the oppression, denigration, dehumanization based on skin color. So that means that white people or people who look white or whiteness, based on language or culture, benefit from this system and this arrangement of hierarchy of power, of privilege, or resources. So that means that whiteness of any kind is regarded as beautiful, intelligent, worthy, something to aspire to, right? So it's actually the combination of both, right? It's both the organization of privilege and power and the oppression, right? It's one thing if you have privilege and have power, but by also oppressing, that means that you're literally getting double benefit of all of that, right? That's exactly what it is. And sort of that cartoon on the side really just gives you a sense of it. It's showing sort of more of that interpersonal, but really that's the idea of racism, is that I bring you, I enslave you, I suppress you, I use your body, your intelligence to get to the top, to get to the pinnacle. Right. And then when I'm like, okay, I need some help here, I'm drowning, I'm dying, I'm losing, I need help. You're like, no, I can't help you. That's a reverse racism. So this is where we are in the country, in that we are trying to dismantle a system that has completely oppressed many non-white people. And while we're trying to do that, we're being told, no, this is reverse discrimination. No, we're all equal. We all, have the same boots with the same bootstraps, when we know literally that is not what this is, right? And so I sort of borrowed this image from the National Equity Project, right? That sort of really, I think, gives a nice sort of this, I would call it insanity circle, right? Insanity is basically, right, doing the same thing over and over again and think you're going to get the different results, right? We are insane, right? So here you create a whole policy, history, all of that. You enslave people, and you do all these things. You enslave, you take away voting rights, you take away loans, you segregate people, all these sort of things. And then on top of that, and that leads to all these inequities and racial disparities that we see. And then because we see the disparities, we're like, oh my God, you poor Black and brown people, you are not smart, you are dangerous, all these things sort of, and then now the policies are reaffirmed, the disparities are reaffirmed, and the assumptions are reaffirmed. We are all in this sort of circle that we just cannot get out of. That's the connection between implicit bias and structural racism, but it was created politically, right? It was through enslavement and through all the other policies that we've created to ensure disparities. And then those disparities continue to perpetuate this idea of racism and this idea that people who are not white are not good enough. They're not worthy. They need to be excluded. They don't get enough jobs. They don't have the right skin color to get the best of the best, right? And this is what it is. It's really an ugly, ugly cycle. I would play this video, but I'm not, but I keep it in here so people kind of get a sense of how racism works, particularly for young children. And whenever you get the slides, you'll have the link. And in the slides, it kind of just shows you, so here you have two kids, right? It's this idea of you have two equal kids coming from the same home. But no, it actually doesn't exist that way. We actually don't have equality at all, especially when looking at by skin color, Black and white in particular. But we don't have that because it was already set up more than 400 years ago for that to never actually happen. And so the idea that we're working out of sort of this equal rights, we all have equal opportunities, is one really built on fallacy and that ignores history. And that's why I say in the end of it, part of my journey was to unlearn. And I feel like I went to some of the best schools. I went to the oldest public school in the nation called Boston Latin School. I did not learn about racism whatsoever. I knew something was not right when all my friends by ninth grade were not there any longer. So I knew, so we didn't learn this, right? So in many ways, I need to unlearn some of the fallacies that exist about our country. And I had to relearn, which means I had to go look at actual facts, actual policies, like see it written, read it for myself. And that takes a little bit of time and attention. And this video kind of gives you a nice sort of like 5 minutes sort of slide to that. I won't play it, I'm gonna move on. But I wanna make sure that we're all operating under the same definition of equity. So, and I borrowed this from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Paula Braveman. Equity is about everyone has a fair and just opportunity to thrive and reach their potential. But this requires we remove obstacles, whether it's poverty, racism, discrimination, anything of the sort. So again, you have to both have the opportunity, a fair one, and the removal of obstacles. Right now, we have created a system where we're like, oh, everybody has opportunity. You can go in to get your early childhood program and you have options. But I don't have options if literally the community I live in does not have a childcare that works for me. It's not the best one if I don't have the best childcare programs. My workforce is not the strongest it can be. That's literally not removing obstacles. And that's definitely not the same opportunity that others who are white and privileged have, right? So this is the part of equity is about both the opportunity and the removal of obstacles, which have been systemically put into our country. So racial equity. So when you take that same definition, it means that we have to create a fair and just opportunity regardless of your race, right? Right now, I can close my eyes and I can tell you there's a Black majority place. It's probably going to have the lowest number of whether it be wealth, whether it be education, name it, right? Because the reason we can name it without having to ever be there is because it's been systematized. This is what racial equity is about, that we have to create a way that race does not determine your potential. It does not determine your worth. It does not determine what you have the access to do. And this is what we have. We have a very racist system that starts really early. So before children are even born, they're already experiencing it. We have a lot of mothers who are dying Black mothers who are dying during birth. We have Black children that are born preterm, low birth weight. So because a lot of this because of the maternal wall has been changed because of the stresses associated with racism, not poverty, racism. Remember Beyonce and Serena had to literally almost die being when they were trying to give birth because the stressors of being Black, wealth does not inoculate you. Your money does not inoculate many of us. Neither does being an athlete, right? It doesn't inoculate you from police violence or murder, right? These are the things that is not about income only, it's literally about race and racism. So how can we engage in evidence-based anti-bias, anti-racist practice? And I use the word evidence-based, and I want to be very careful with that. I drink some water. Evidence-based is kind of thrown around, and I would say we have to be careful because I would argue whose evidence and whose words are we using? Who are most of the publishers? Who are the scholars? Most of them, right? A lot of our evidence is based on white supremacy and a defensive lens about Blackness, non-white people. And this is what we have to begin to really work on is what do we consider evidence and whose words are we using to do that? I'll quickly just say we have a lot of studies where Black bodies and other minoritized populations have been used to advance science, but often not for their benefit, right? We all know about the Tuskegee syphilis study, right? Where literally, men were allowed to live with the disease knowing knowing that we had a cure. And even when they left the state to go try to get a cure, they were actually arrested and then sent back, right? We have things like the Jewish hospital cancer cells. We have Willowbrook hepatitis, where again, they gave children who had some cognitive deficits hepatitis and studied what happened. So we are a country that has always sort of perpetuated a lot of science on Black bodies and other minoritized bodies. Early childhood, I'm an early childhood person. And as Laura said, I was just at HighScope a day ago. That was my last day there. And HighScope is best known for the para-preschool study. And again, provide us with a lot of evidence that we use to substantiate the importance of early childhood. But a lot of those children were Black, right, in the 60s, right? That they were Black children in the 60s in the middle of Ypsilanti, it's next to Ann Arbor, one of the wealthiest universities in the country. And so we're sort of saying, hey, poor Black people, we'll give you something, I think, right? If you help us establish science, but you never get the benefit of it. Crime and punishment will help, we'll create a whole bunch, a bunch of prisons and prison cells and jail cells for you, but you never benefit off of anything about crime reduction. So we have done a lot of science on Black bodies and Black people. And for the most part, they never get sort of that quality of whether it's early childhood, whether it's medicine, whether it's even formula, and so many more that we need to really look at even our work as scholars. How much are we sort of perpetuating this issue of racism in our work and weaponizing it, right? So it's one thing to do it on people of color, another thing to weaponize it because they never get the benefit of what their bodies have helped to contribute, right? And eugenics is evident in today's science, right? By maintaining sort of this white supremacy and deficit lens that often, if not always, perpetuates that Black people especially are less than in all facets of life. If you think about it, the first generation of Black people that actually were thought of as full human with full human rights was in the 70s, right? So most of our parents were not full human beings according to the US laws, right? They were, 3/5 of humans. That's what we've done in many ways, is literally dehumanize people and wonder why we are probably angry, wonder why we're probably stressed, wonder why we probably die early. And this idea that everything Black is bad and pathological, everything white is good and superior. This is the issue, right? We have the school suspension data that many of us, I must say, knew about this. We knew because our kids were the ones being suspended with really minor infractions. And this is early childhood. This is, Black children help to make early childhood what it is today. And the fact that they make up about 18 to 19% of the population in early childhood, at least in publicly funded programs, and make up almost 50% of children who are either suspended or expelled. And it's not just a Black boy issue, this is also a Black girl issue. So I know people have thought about it's just a Black boy. No, Black girls get suspended, at a higher rate for their own female peer groups. So this is an issue that even Black children who helped establish early childhood are actually being excluded from actually engaging in early childhood in many ways, right? We see the achievement gap. A lot of us, I started with that idea about the achievement gap. Like, why is the achievement gap here? Why is it? I don't know. Let me understand. In many ways, we see anything about college education, Black people, Latino people, less likely to have education compared to Asians. Again, not recognizing there's a reason for this. It's not because, Black and Latinos are lazy and not smart. Again, we have to look at the context and we have to look at the history. We know that Black people are likely to be in prison. Black men, 1 out of 3, likely to be in prison in their lifetime, right? Look around. If there's 3 Black men in this here Zoom world that we're in today, one of you is likely to be imprisoned. And that is an awful, awful thing. And this is in prison and not even being killed, right? And Black women, 1 out of 18. So this idea that Black is bad and pathological is literally part of white supremacy. And the idea of racism is, to me, is probably most inherent in the wealth gap. White people have about an average of $170,000 compared to Black people as about $17,000 and Latinos about $21,000. This means that if there's a catastrophe like we're in right now, that Black and Latino families are going to struggle to make it through. And remember, wealth is not about income. Wealth is actually something that's generated over time. So if you're able to buy property back in 18 something, if you're able to buy land, if you're able to invest in stock markets, if you're able to do all these things, but knowing that you literally legally sanctioned Black people, especially, to not be part of it, whether through segregation, through Jim Crow laws, through all kinds of tools that were sanctioned by the federal government and other state institutions. The fact that we have this wealth gap should not shock anybody. This is not because, Black and Latino people are lazy. It's because it literally was legalized that even the opportunities were not even equitable. Not only were you privileged in one group, you were oppressing another. And so this is why when early childhood, I think of it as a potential avenue, right? In that if we can give children the best start in life, they can kind of, be able to become wealthy. That's not really true, because in the end of it, it actually takes generations in many, many ways to actually get wealth. Like you can probably get rich, but to get wealthy requires an accumulation and an amassing of a level of assets, right, over debt. And this is something that we have to all recognize, that the focus on poverty is one thing, but the focus on asset development is literally where we need to be. And not only do we have issues of wealth and sort of that whole history around asset accumulation, we also have policies that were sort of engineered in many ways. I sort of look on the Moynihan report. Right, the Moynihan report, for those who don't know it, and I can send you the link as part of the part of your PowerPoint when you get it. He sort of says, what do we do for, the Negro family, right? What is wrong with the Negro family? And in essence, he did all his analyses and said, the problem with the Negro family is that, there's a high marital birth rates, right? A lot of Black people are being born to single mothers, and they're being raised by single mothers. And so we're creating a matriarch society that really undermines the role and the opportunities for Black men in the family. And because of the diminished authority of Black men and Black fathers, that this basically means that men are thrown out of the home. And so we'll basically be a bastard kind of a culture. And so this idea, this is how they saw Black people and why we have single parent households, and explained it that way. Again, let's remember, this is during the time when the federal government was literally separating families, literally not even allowing sort of voting rights. We have segregation. So imagine now the context where this is sort of shown, that why come all you Black women are pregnant and single mothers? Because you created the system that ensured that Black men wouldn't have jobs, Black men were in prison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the same exact data and you really understand the context that Black people in particular were living in the 60s and 70s, you understand that, first of all, there was a strong kinship bond, right? Like you've heard Black parents talk about, oh, that's my cousin. They're not blood related, but they're cousins, because we really have these strong kinship bonds that helps you get through losses and trauma, right? When people are either arrested or killed, you still want to be able to feel like you're part of a family. And this is what we have. We have strong work orientation. Many men, many women were working outside the home before we needed childcare, right? So we have a very strong work orientation. It's hardly ever talked about. Mind you, we were also enslaved. So this is people who were enslaved working for nothing. And you say we don't have work orientation. And we adapt to family roles, right? Because you have to be able to be nimble, right? You don't know what's going to happen. Your life is not even your own. You're not treated as a full human, right? And we have high achievement orientation, even when the data shows, even for people like me who got a PhD, on average, we make less than a white person with a high school degree. So we still want to have our children be the most educated, value education, even when it does not confer the same benefits. That is important to note. We literally have high achievement. Talk to anybody Black. We want to make sure our kids graduate college, graduate everything, but it does not confer the same society benefits as it does other people. And finally, we have a strong religious orientation, right? This is why the church is still, while it may not function the same way in every place, it is still the bedrock of many, many communities, many Black communities, because of that spiritual and religious orientation. That is the Black family. However, but most of our policies, especially those that are about supporting families, especially when people think poor means Black, right? It's about blaming the victim, right? This is what we've done with COVID-19. When people heard about, oh my God, it's mostly Black and brown people, they were like, oh my God, we know why. It's because you're obese, right? It's because you live in multi-generational housing and families. It's also because, you don't get medical access, so you don't go to the doctor often enough. You have these underlying health conditions, et cetera, diabetes. Again, poverty, a lot of these literally is blaming and shaming people, right? As opposed to saying, you know what, a lot of these things, we can actually pinpoint diabetes to many, many systemic things, whether from food deserts, food access, lack of high quality healthcare, lack of doctors who actually don't have biases, because doctors do have a lot of biases that we've known now, especially about Black people. And even the idea of multi-generational housing being negative is not, right? It is a great thing to be multi-generational housing because that's how you create your village. That's how you create your community. When you have your grandparents, your parent, your child, because you form that deep family bond that we know is necessary to battle any stressors, particularly racism, right? So we don't talk about sort of this idea of racism being the underlying issue of COVID-19. And I think it's happening now, right? I think we have no choice. But a lot of the narrative was really about blaming, oh, because you were fat. That was your decision to be fat. That was your decision to get diabetes, right? These are the messages that we were hearing sort of under all the currents about why is there racial disparities. And this is part of the challenge. And limitation to our current knowledge base is the problem, because most research and practice and policies don't actually ever consider minoritized communities, the strengths that they bring, right? They don't look at the, like, to me, as somebody of color who has made it through the whole system of the US, at least up till now, to get, if you understand all the different obstacles that are in the way of people of color, you will understand that there must be something innately strong in this group of people, right? So we have to begin to see the assets of particular groups of communities who have not only been oppressed, but definitely not been privileged, right? So we don't think about the actual problems or the context. We don't think about what is missing. We think about much more about what can we do? How can we fix you? Right? It's all about what is the individual, as opposed to this is a systemic issue. So again, racism is about systems. It's about institutions in many ways. It's not about, one-on-one. Of course, it's one-on-one, discrimination, one-on-one biases, but the system still continues to perpetuate a lot of the inequities, even for those who are doing the best that they can do under the condition, in many ways. So I would say, why does it matter whether we're focused on strength-based or asset-based versus deficit? Is that if we don't have that framing, then we're always going to blame the victim, right? We shape the question in a different way. The solutions are different, right? So for example, feel like, oh, the reason why the child, doesn't know their A, B's, and C's, like, oh, the family's lazy, they don't know anything. Or it could be a whole host of reasons, both that doesn't matter developmentally, kids are going to learn all those things. That's one. Or two is that the family is under such a level of stress because they live in sort of housing with lead. We don't even know if it's even a biologically vulnerability because they live in lead, right? They are drinking lead water, or they live in a housing that has lead, for example. We don't know any of these context-driven things. We sort of tend to blame the child or the family, right? And so whatever your framing is then becomes the messaging. So just like the Moynihan report, this whole idea that Black families are sort of these negative pathological beings, people see Black people that way in policies, right? So when people talk about, oh, how do we make sure that people get their checks? Oh, we must drug test them, right? This is why our policies are always looking at poor people as sort of can be trusted. And if you think about a lot of the policies, always think about sort of people of color, even though we know number-wise, it's mostly white people that are poor on a number scale. But there is this sort of this narrative and this messaging that sort of puts poverty or poorness with Black face or darker skin versus, rich and white, right? This is that sort of that circle of the system creates the disparities creates these narrative and implicit bias. And we see this. And so our policies are driven by those same exact biases and structural systems that continue to sort of create this circle of policies, disparities, and also implicit bias. So let's take, for example, the achievement gap, right? Like, duh, like that's what most of us started with, whether in early childhood and K to 12, and any name it, this is the example, right? And I should say that some of us may discount the achievement gap, which we argue this is real evidence of children's ability, their intelligence, or we just measuring how white are you and how rich are you. But regardless, that's a different conversation. Let's think about this. We have probably appropriated over $500 million from the ESEA. This is the Secondary Educational Act from 2008 to 2019. It doesn't include any state or local funds, any sort of intervention, special, any of that. Let me just remind us that reduction in the Black-white achievement gap is 0 points. 0 point in reading and 1 point in math. So let me remind you, we have spent $500 million, and it's literally in the trillions. It's really much more than that. But let's just using that marker, and we reduced it by 0. So this begins to ask us, what is going on? Why is this still with us? Why do we still have this achievement gap thing? And I would say because it's an economic. I got a job. I did a career partly based on that, right? Graduate schools, careers, educators, faculty. I mean, it drives education of K to 12 system. It drives early childhood. This is what created early childhood in many ways, to address the achievement gap. But now it's like, oh, no, we can't do anything about that, but we're going to go ahead and say children start off healthy. I agree with that. We should focus on things, not the on other things and not the achievement gap. But we have to understand that part of the achievement gap also maintains this white supremacy and oppression that says, oh, you poor minorities are so dumb, at least the Black and brown, because we know the Asians are actually higher than white children, right? So it maintains this white supremacy ideals and narrative that Black people and brown people are not smart enough, they can't keep up, they can't make it, right? So the question is, do we really want a solution, right? If we did, what does that mean? What should we do differently? Do we do different measures? Do we do different assets? What do we do in our programming from prenatal all the way to K-12? What kind of assets we ensure that families have? What kind of sort of conversations do we have about the achievement gap not being about children, but about how are schools ready? How are programs making sure that families have what they need, right? Instead of this whole idea of children are the dummies, right? That's literally what we're saying, right? What do we do to actually understand why that is created and why it has been with us forever and ever, even though a lot of us have bought Cadillacs, mansions, etc., off of the achievement gap, right? So how do we sort of go about cultivating what I would say now is an anti-racist early child research program and partnership? Because to me, it's not just about the practice of early childhood, right? It's about this research that undercuts that, right? There's policies that's part of that, right? We need to be doing things differently. And that means that we actually have to see any disparities, and I would actually argue any opportunities for children's learning, we have to see it from a bigger lens, right? This doesn't mean that you can fix it, right? If I'm an early child teacher, I'm not asking you to go fix labor laws. I'm not asking you to go fix housing, policies, but I am asking you to really, really think about everything within your four walls. Why am I here? Why is my program funded this way? Why is my program in this location? Why are the sort of child demographics this way? Why are my colleagues, their backgrounds this way? We have to actually begin to understand a lot of what we're seeing today was actually created many, many, many years ago, right? Like COVID-19, yes, while it sprung on us in early this year, we have to understand the manner, what we're seeing in terms of the disproportionality was actually created a long time ago, right? From our health policies, our work policies, who became the essential workforce, who was provided the opportunity to sit at home like myself, right? And work from home and be able to accumulate wealth, right? Because if you're not going out to pay for gas, you're saving some kind of money, right? So those policies help to sort of substantiate who is an essential workforce. So childcare, pre-K teachers and school-based were able to actually stay at home and do virtual. Those were essential. Mostly Black and brown people and women in that were actually forced to stay open or not to get subsidy dollars, right? That's the bifurcated system we have. And that was created through labor laws from many, many years ago. And now we're like, oh my God, the programs are closing. Well, because you sort of created this, you didn't know the intention of it, other than we didn't want women, Black women and brown women, to get the same opportunity as those who were in K-12 or who had the credentials, as we call it. But that's because we created what we're seeing today. And so this emergency for childcare is like, yeah, we created that. We created this emergency without taking into context all the things we created to create inequities. And that's what we have to begin to do, is how do we think about all the things that we see with children? How do we think about it within a systems lens of education, of health, of policy, all these things, and how they impact children and also their families? And again, I sort of say, as we sort of talk about in today, being an anti-racist, I would say this: to be an anti-racist, right? And this is from the the National Museum of African American History and Culture. To create an equal society, we must commit to making unbiased choices and being anti-racist in all aspects of our lives. Right? I'm gonna leave that in the stream for a couple of seconds. Because Laura talked about sort of the book that colleagues and I co-wrote about anti-bias, and this was a book I was thinking about for many years, and it came at a very sadly a good time. But it's a book, Why It's for Early Childhood, written large, about how do you create anti-bias and anti-racist classrooms. It's really about how do we all get on a journey to do that, right? Anti-racism is literally should be the way we are, the way we operate, how we interact, how we think. It literally is what you are. And so many ways, I'm hoping that people don't sort of put it down and say, I'm gonna use it today in my classroom and then take it off when I get home. It's literally part of all aspects of your life. And that's how to me, that you're being anti-racist, when you literally know that it's part of who you are and it's part of the air you literally breathe, because it gives you a different lens to look through things. So how do we get there? How do you become an early anti-bias, anti-racist sort of educator or person? Really, it's about a person. I say that we have to re-educate ourselves about history. I feel like I can't underscore that. And there's many ways to do that. We have to integrate rather than just desegregate. And I'll talk about these in a little bit. Critique everything, show a level of humility, particularly if you have privilege and power. We have to really focus on erase and racism in all of its forms. And then we have to be sort of willing to revision new ways of being, new approaches, new theories, new ways. And it doesn't have to be something like mind blowing, like, artificial intelligence, but as we have to actually think about what would it look like if we did not have a racist society. What would my program look like if it wasn't racist, right? So re-education to me is part of the journey, right? You have to unlearn a lot of what you think you know. You have to relearn it. And it's not me telling you, it's that we all literally have to read. It could be from resources, there's books, there's videos, there's audios, there's so many things that we can learn. We can actually read the laws and policy, which I have done, and I'm not a legal scholar, right? But we have to know that these things that we see today, these things we're fighting for today was actually written in policies. It's not like your neighbor said, oh, you are the N-word or whatever, a derogatory term. This is that the federal government instituted the highway laws that ensured that Black communities will be decimated, right? We had the Tulsa massacre. For those who now I think are much more aware about it, you'll realize a lot of that, police knew what was happening, but they allowed Black people's community in the Edgewood community to be burnt down. These are things that were sanctioned by whether it's federal or state, right? So we have to educate ourselves about how racism operates in the both the privilege of whiteness and the oppression of non-white people. So we have to, and then we have to live in the shame and the guilt, because in the end of it, our children have to live in that, right? We have to live in all the outcomes of whatever it is that we're feeling. If you're feeling anger, great. If you're feeling shame, great. At least that means that my 3-year-old, my 7-year-old, your 3-year-old, your 2-year-old doesn't have to feel that. If we're trying to protect the innocence, which I've heard so much, this past year about protecting children's innocence. Unfortunately, Black children their innocence cannot be protected because they have to be informed early about who they are in their lives that they have to be prepared for. The second thing is we have to integrate our teams, our networks, our programs. To me, we can't ever really learn to unlearn, and we can't ever be motivated if we're not part of sort of this cross-racial work, right? I think for me still now, the saddest part, and probably the most, it's not even sad, it's hurtful, is when I see just a group of white scholars, again, they're brilliant, writing about Black children, or writing about brown children, and not ever considering, can I have a Black scholar, another Black scholar, another co-scholar with me? And I think that it sort of says that we're not good enough to be part of your team to examine our people and our community. And so I think part of what we have to do is begin to integrate all of our teams and all of our networks as much as we can. I also have the vision of, can we integrate our programs? But again, I want to make sure that it doesn't mean that anything Black or brown is terrible. Is that for us to move towards a new world, we have to begin to integrate many things so that we understand how the oppression of one, what it means, and then what privilege really means. And you can't often see that unless you're literally cross-racial interactions. And we see that a lot with, especially biracial families. And people of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color should not be add-ons, right? Don't just get your Black person, but you have to really want to have that person really be part of who and what you're doing. You have to kind of reorient yourself. So that means that you have to think about, who are you calling on at any given moment. We have to integrate. And then I say you have to critique every single thing you know and do. For me, it was questioning, okay, why did I go to this high school? How did I get here? And I use the word critical race theory, right? And obviously the thing that the current occupier of the White House is sort of trying to put executive order against, because the critical race theory is a legal actual term that basically says that because the US was constructed under anti-Blackness, particularly anti-Blackness racism, the critical race theory helps you to really unpack everything from this racialized lens. Even if you're looking at rurality, looking at disability, anything that you look at, even gender identity, anything that you look at, when you overlay race in that, you will see deep inequities, deep oppression. That's what it does. It tells you that our system is so systematized that anything particularly Black has been completely created in a way that it always oppresses. And that's the idea of critical race theory, is that it's a legal term that then, it's in education, et cetera, but it's a legal term that people use to really uncover how racism is literally manifested in our system, is perpetuated in every aspect of our world. And so So to me, this is important for us to understand that. And engaging in this critical discourse with a multiracial network is really important to decolonize our work, to decolonize what is good high quality programming, what is a good curriculum, what is a good teacher, what is a good, so we, for us, if we don't actually go through this process of unlearning and relearning, trust me, even the best intentions will always lead to racism without understanding that, right? And I say, even good people sold their family to slavery. That is real and that is true. So we have to critique everything we know. And that means, I say that for me too. I literally critique my work from 10 years ago. I'm like, oh my God, I used such a deficit lens. I didn't understand this, right? Because I wasn't fully on the journey to unpack the system and how the system is operated to give me a particular lens that continues to then use my research to weaponize other practices and policies. That is something that we all have to engage in. And part of that is showing humility and how we should approach this journey, right? There are many, and all of you, many of us who are brilliant, who have great intentions, but we actually have to know where our privileges lie. Is it privilege because of your profession? Is it privilege because of who your family is, the institution you work for? But we have to recognize that that privilege, in many ways, we have to remember that it gives us this level of security, this level of autonomy and independence that many people do not have. And so we have to be sure a little bit of humility during the journey to understand that there's people who do not have any iota of any privilege that we have, right? And it's okay. And we have to sort of be okay that people are not going to like some of the stuff you have, right? If you've been privileged all your life, getting a few like not likes and a thumbs down, you'll be okay, right? You're not going to lose your panties, you're not going to lose your wealth, but remember that because most of us have trafficked in a level of racism and bias, and particularly anti-Black bias and racism, we have to recognize our role in that and recognize that it's really like, right, you got to know to be aware to do something differently. And then, of course, we have to really be part of shaping, erasing systemic racism and white privilege and bias, right? And that means that we have to expand the process of sort of what is the strengths that Black people, Indigenous people, Latino people, other people of color, like what is it that they bring to this world, right? Like one of the things we talk about, particularly with children of color and children who are linguistically diverse, is that they're they're dual language learners, or they're bicultural, they have these linguistic sophistication. We don't give them credit for that. Like imagine a kid who was like 4 years old, who's like, okay, I gotta learn, I gotta use my, my Spanish or Hmong language at home, because even though the school doesn't mind, I need to still learn English. That level of cognitive flexibility to go in and out at such a young age is something we don't give credibility to. Even for Black people who actually speak a different vernacular, we don't give credit to that. You literally have to learn different ways of being, because if you act a certain way as a Black boy, you're gonna be treated a certain way. So they have to learn, okay, how do I behave? How do I say something? How do I move? Who has to do that? What white adult, what white child has to be so hyper vigilant about how they are seen and then eventually acted upon? So again, let's think about how do we erase racism both in our systems, our programs, but also in the way that we are interacting and the way that we force people to perform. Like we're asking children, young children, to perform a particular way because we fear them. We're throwing kids out of the classroom because we fear them. We're handcuffing kids because we fear them. We're talking about a 48-month-old, a 36-month-old, a 60-month-old, right? This is part of, we have to erase sort of our privilege and our bias about how certain kids are viewed, how certain families are viewed. And we have to make it so clear that you literally want this 4-year-old, 48-month-old to not throw a tantrum because somebody took their paper. It's a 48-month-old throw tantrums. That's what they do, right? It's an ego. That's part of the stage of development. And so we have to begin to really think about, why are we treating this kid differently than this kid, and make it visible. But we also have to hold ourselves accountable. We are the adults. To me, kids should not be experiencing the trauma they're experiencing because of adult decisions that we have made many, many years ago. Whether you're going to say, well, my family didn't own slaves. If you're white, you benefit from a system that continues to maintain supremacy, privilege, and at the same time oppressing people, right? How many people have to walk out every day and say, oh my God, am I going to live? Because if I have my tail is not working, or if I make a certain gesture, I'm going to be shot and killed. Not many people have to walk out the house with that feeling, right? So, but we have to hold ourselves accountable to making that very visible, that this pain, this trauma, this hypervigilance is real. And then finally, we have to re-envision anti-racism program and research policy, all of it, right? We have to say, how is our work? How is my practice? How is it inclusive? How does it consider issues of anti-racism as well as strength-based? right? And again, remember, anti-racism is about dismantling systems that oppress while at the same time also privileging. So for example, is your curriculum, who is it based on? Who says that that's the way that we should do instructions? Schedule, is a schedule really privileging certain groups of kids who sort of have a home, a house has a schedule, right? Like we have to begin to think through all these lenses about who is this privilege? Is it privileging the children that you work with, or is it privileging what you want them to be, which may be more white and wealthy, right? And for those who are research or policy, is whose sort of theories are we elevating? Whose policies and language are we elevating, right? Most policies were not created to help Black and brown people, especially not Black people. And we have to actually recognize that we this idea of race, of this colorblind policy does not exist. Actually, that in itself doesn't even exist. Most policies were created either to privilege white people or to oppress the other, particularly Black people. That is most of our policies. So when we see that, oh my God, the wealth gap is still where it was, the income gap is still where it was, education is still where it was, the achievement gap hasn't moved, because all of our policies has continued to be this sort of, I don't see color. Yes, you do, because how is it that systemically we can see the same outcome over time? Only if it's systemic is this not possible. This is why every policy from the whether it's early childhood to K to 12 to health policies, if they have not been sort of examined with this level of anti-racism and racial equity, then it's probably going to perpetuate a level of racism, which is why I appreciate public health, because they name it. They're like, this is part of the public health we have to address is racism and inequities. And they name it, and they create program and policy research that says we must understand how it works in institutions and systems that we're part of, and how do we go about eradicating it. And that's why they have a lot of evidence at population level that's changed disparities. Even though we have these maternal mortality rates, it has gone down because they've actually said it's not about poverty. It's about racism, and how do we make sure that we start early to really begin to reduce the stresses that Black women are under. We start to train doctors about how to monitor Black women and understand how history plays a part in their womb actually being a stress factory that creates either them dying or their children dying and or preterm birth weight. Mind you, I live the life of racism. 4 of my brothers died before or after. All the girls lived, but the boys died, because in particular, males are vulnerable both biologically and socially. And this is because of the system we create. And I would say part of what we do, and all of us do, is that I don't know is no longer an option. We all can be smart, educated people and walk around and say, I didn't know this. That is literally not acceptable, because you can get a book, get your Netflix account, talk to a friend, go to Facebook, do whatever. But the I don't know is no longer an option, at least in my book, because we are too smart for this, right? And so to me, part of going through this anti-racist, anti-bias journey is to be on a journey. There's not an end to this, right? Because I have to still check myself, right? I have to still be ready to engage in sort of being richer, right? I have to, continue to read, make sure I'm reading Black scholars, past and present, because they've been silenced and made invisible. I have to sort of make sure that I make any institution racism visible, in many, many ways. Why is this program being funded this way? And why do you have the same program, but 2 different funders? You have 2 separate classrooms in the same building, right? You have one funded by Montessori families who are private and mostly white and Asian, and you have one funded by Head Start, and they're separate. Why is that? Does that even make sense to us? We have to continue to build diverse collaborations and networks and social circles that are a little bit more cross-racial integrated. Again, I love being with my Black people. And I imagine the same thing with Latinos and other groups of color and white people, right? Because you all kind of hire mostly white people, right? That's what we have, even in places where there should be a lot of Black people. We still have white people who are leaders. We have people who are like us. But part of what we have to do as a country who's trying to be the best we can be is to really become much more diverse in our collaboration and who our leaders are. And remember that there is no perfection, right? That we have to continue to reflect on this, that we have to continue to be honest and show humility and, not be fragile, right? When you're being called out or your group is being called out in essence, right? That part of it has to be being bold and courageous in many, many ways. And I say this, and this is from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that we have to keep moving forward, no matter what happens in November, or no matter what happens with coronavirus. We have to keep moving forward, because our children deserve the best and they deserve better, right? So if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And that's what I'm sort of imploring all of us on this anti-racist journey, is that I don't even care whether you never thought about racism until this moment, is that at least you're here and you're listening. And I hope that it sort of encourages you to say, you know what, I'm gonna go pick up that book, whatever the book is. Go Google the anti-racism book. There's many. I can give you resources, but you can Google it. To get on the journey, get on the train. You know, whether you stay in the back of the train, I don't care, but get on the train and be part of it, because we need to continue moving forward, or we are a nation in crisis, as you know, both, you know, Ms. Crane and also Dean Davis Pope sort of highlighted, that we have to continue to do more and do better, and because it's on us. So with that, I say thank you. I was going to do a poll, but I want to make sure I have enough time for us to have some conversation. So thank you, and I really appreciate you all being here, and you'll see more of me as the day goes on. So Laura, I'll stop sharing my screen and let's have a conversation.
Thank you for that. Whoops, that was incredible. And I won't even just speak for myself. I've been watching the pretty ongoing comments, I think, of knowledge building, empowering, inspiring. So thank you. Unfortunately, I don't want to put our whole schedule into disarray. We have a breakout session. We have breakout sessions scheduled at 12:15. But I think what I've been looking at these questions, and I mean, every one of them is amazing. So I'm just gonna, here's one that I find, well, they're all really compelling, but let me ask this one. This is from one of our participants, and I'll do the short version. How do you recommend speaking with others who refuse to believe they have white privilege? They don't believe they're racist. They don't believe systemic racism exists. And then the question is closed by friends who say, well, I can't possibly be racist. I have Black friends. So how do we deal with this, Iheoma?
Oh my God, that's the question. That's always the question of the day. That's a good question. And I want to say, I can't see all the chats, but hopefully come to the next session with Steffi and I will give you more. I would say you have to sort of keep talking to them. But first, I say before you do that, just make sure you have your receipts. I call it receipts. Have your receipts, which means that you actually have to know what is racism, right? Because then for somebody to say I'm not racist, like, well, let's define racism. That's why I said tell people, don't go around calling people racist, right? Because I would say literally the definition of racism, literally as I gave you, is a system created to privilege white people and whiteness. So if you're a Black person, some of us Black people look white. If you look white, you probably have some privilege, but it's that and the oppression of the other. And so, if it's systemic too. And so it's to understand the definition and then say, yes, you might not have owned slaves, you may have Black friends, but it doesn't actually matter, right? So to me, it's making sure that you're very clear about the definition. And for those who are not willing to sort of say that they have privilege, right? Because we do have a lot of people in rural America, people who are poor, who are white, who are like, I don't got privilege, I'm poor. And I would say, well, let's take a look at this here. When you leave your house and you have a broken taillight and a police officer pulls you over, do you literally have sweaty palms? Do you hyperventilate? Do you say, let me go ahead and get my phone and record? Let me text my wife or my husband or my friend or whatever to say I'm being pulled over, right? Do you ever worry about when your child leaves the house, they will come back, right? There's certain things that you have as a white person that you literally don't even have to think. You don't even have to think about. Again, you may be poor and have other financial stressors, but there's a level of psychological terror that you never experience and you never will. And education, health, having money, being an entertainer, being a president does not inoculate you. So I say in the end of it, look at President Obama and how he was treated as a Black man, as a president, and the sort of vitriol he got. And he was the MF president. So that's what I say. Sorry for having to almost curse at y'all.
That's okay. It's 2020 in the middle of a pandemic.
And it's Friday.
So I am gonna just comment that that was a 2-in-1, because there was another question which I think it's the other side of the coin, and I hear this a lot, in our country being white is a privilege, but not all white people are privileged necessarily. Although you and I, we can talk, but many issues are muddled with race and class. But I've certainly heard people who are white say, there's no white privilege, I can't even pay my bills, which I think is what you were just getting at.
That's right. That's right. It's
different
not poverty.
level.
There's a difference, right? There's poverty and there's racism. They're not the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Yes, you can be poor and exactly you're dealing with stressors, and of course, we don't want you to be poor, of course. But there's something that's conferred for you because of your whiteness. And white poor people were part of actually maintaining the system we have. If you read the history books, you understand that actually when there was a point in time when it was like Black people and poor white people were coming together to say, hey, rich, wealthy white men, can you please stop oppressing us? They said, white people, we will give you privilege based on your skin color. This is why we have what we have, because actually and this is what we see today, that a lot of, unfortunately, lower income white people actually vote against their best interests because of the issue of racism has been literally weaponized, and that your skin color determines a lot of things. So yes, while you may have these financial challenges and even mental health and all that, your whiteness has actually been privileged in a systemic way.
Great, thank you. So I wish we had another.
I know, I'm sorry.
We do have another hour with you. We just have to.
2 hours.
Yeah, we have you all day. So I want to remind everybody, we have breakouts that'll come online at 12:15. The lineup, you probably at crane.osu.edu. We have four simultaneous ones, and I have to tell you, I might have to weave in and out because they're all incredible. But those will come online at about 12:15. And we'll go to 105. And so if you have the lineup, we're weaving in and out of 3 different activities for the next few hours, and then we'll come back together for a closing. But I wish we could all clap. Well, we can all clap in our home offices or wherever we're Zooming from. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us. Okay, and we'll see everyone in a little bit.